putting the X in success, employee engagement, and the power of storytelling, with Pluxee UK's Antonia Haines and best-selling author Jamie Mackenzie.
Welcome to our Pluxee UK podcast. My name is Antonia Haines. I am Head of Technology Portfolio at Pluxee UK. I am joined today by Jamie Mackenzie, our best-selling author of 28 Bags of Sprouts. Welcome, Jamie.
Lovely to see you, Tony, and thank you so much for inviting me on today to the podcast.
Okay.
Really excited.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Sprout model and what led you to where you are now?
So I believe that storytelling, which is a structured communication, can really help to level that up and allow you to really change things significantly in a good way. So the book really centers on the Sprout model, which is a framework that I've designed, which covers the 6 core principles of storytelling, which you can then apply to any communication scenario. So you might be thinking, why sprouts? So just very quickly to give some context, Sprouts are centered around a story that I told what was over 20 years ago during an interview, where I was asked the question, what are you most passionate about, Jamie? For an interview at the time, Toshiba. And I shared a story about how on Christmas Eve in 1998, I sold 28 bags of Sprouts on that particular day, which is, a lot of Sprouts, almost 10,000, I think, as individual numbers. So I shared this story in this interview, and that made such a difference to the 2 recruiters at the time, the 2 managers, that they decided to choose me over anyone else. It really stood me out from the crowd. So that particular story, when I reflect on it, it reminded me about the importance of storytelling and how connecting emotionally first and rationalizing second is really key. So the Sprout model is obviously centered around that, and it's 6 layers of a sprout, essentially. And what I do is I look at the 6 core principles of great storytelling in any communication scenario. And that starts with impact in the center, then looks at people. You then have the kind of traditional start point, main event, and end point. And then you finish your 6th layer with nurture, which is how you keep that whole communication and storytelling full of creativity and energy, throughout. And so I bring it to life in the book through different stories of myself. I bring it to life with the help of 6, incredibly knowledgeable experts as well, ranging from all sorts of different areas of technical expertise through to Rugby World Cup winner, Matt Dawson MBE as well. And the book is there to bring it to life and allow people, I hope, to kind of bring the Sprout model to all their communications every day to increase the impact, make a positive change to their lives and to others as well.
Good. Well, you'll be pleased to know I have read your book.
Thank
and actually,
you, Tony.
You made a point at the beginning there about empathy and making it feel. And there's one part that you talk about going to the allotment with your granddad, and actually you bring it home, and then we've had a conversation about this before. It's a bit of like a Scrum model, like you see in Scrum and Agile, in which you've got your grandmother was adding the butter, the secret recipe in there, and then you would go down and you enjoyed going down to the allotment with your dad to pick those sprouts, which was very nice. But obviously then unfortunately your grandmother passed away and there was a gap there. But that resonated throughout, as in for me that sounded like that was quite a core, and therefore you took that to like the true meaning. I know that you had later the grocery part with when you went to work. Is that do you draw on that emotional connection when telling other people?
Oh, 100%. I think storytelling and stories have a wonderful way of bringing to life memories of the past, memories of today. It's kind of like a lovely way of time traveling. Takes you back, and you take yourself back to that memory. And probably when you were reading through that story, in parallel, you were thinking about your family, friends, or people that you've experienced similar memories with. You'll then visualize, which is another wonderful ingredient of storytelling. You start to visualize this. And then suddenly you're immersed in this wonderful experience of these emotions that are tapping into you. Now, this is where I believe you as an individual can really shift an audience and kind of move an audience over and above me coming up with a ton of facts and figures, which, by the way, is important. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, especially in change. But using that emotional connection, remembering we're all people, we're all human beings, and using that story in particular, I did that on purpose, for sure. It was a lovely story to tell, by the way. I mean, it's a fabulous memory for me. But to also emotionally connect with people and demonstrate the power very quickly in the book of storytelling, which Thank you for bringing it up, and I'm glad that it did.
Well, obviously today we're talking a lot about disengagement and re-engagement with the workforce. And actually, Jamie, I have some stats on some of it. So if you bear with me 1 minute, I'm going to go through some of those. So we have a disengaged workforce in the number 4 people risk in the UK. Now, there are a difference between unengaged and disengaged. Do you know the difference between those two, Jamie?
I think I should do, having worked for an engagement company. You put me on the spot with that one.
Our unengaged employee is someone that's never been engaged. Yeah. Actually, they won't be. They don't have a passion to come to work. They just show up and turn up. And then you have your disengaged. And would you like to cover the disengaged part?
The disengaged are those who maybe felt or been at a level of engagement before in their experience at work, but over time, for whatever reason and whatever factors, their levels of engagement are starting to drop away. Could be recoverable, depending on how you manage that. But if left for too long, they'll get to a point whereby the disengagement creates resentment, and then ultimately, typically, that'll be talent that you might lose. Yeah.
Exactly that. And actually, and why does it matter? And that's a really important part. So the business with high levels of disengagement, did you know this, Jamie? That 20%, you see a 20% increase in absenteeism, a 17% decrease in productivity, a 10% drop in profitability, and low employee engagement cost the UK over 257 billion annually. Can you believe that?
Sadly, I can believe it. Honestly, I really can. I think if anyone listening to this, if you reflect for a second on how did you feel when you were disengaged, and did you try and remedy that, or did you let it go, and then what was the end result? I think you'd be surprised as to how many people are. So it absolutely not surprising at all.
Yep, and then you have the flip side of it. So in comparison, so businesses with high level engagement, you've got 21% greater profitability and 59% less employee turnover, which makes complete sense when you've got an engaged team. And then obviously the causes of disengagement, we've discussed this. So that's communication breakdown, mistrust of leadership, and poor management. Now, there's something in all of that, stat, and I'm going to bring you back to your book because you make a really good point about, because disengagement doesn't just exist on your employees, a small part of the workforce. It's everyone. It's your leaders as well. Yeah. And you made a point of authenticity. Yeah. That sometimes as leaders, especially, you need to go out to your teams and deliver a message, and that message may not sit right with you, but you and I felt that too. You have to do it, but you want to be authentic, and actually, if you're not, then actually that hurts your engagement too on several levels. But then obviously, that what you're going to delivering may impact. How would you describe it in your book any further, or go into the detail now?
I think when I kind of put the book together and I had the 6 experts, we all had the same actually position on it, that in the workplace generally there was a really big gap in the capability to communicate effectively with impact and storytelling. So we see this gap. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone's amazing or everyone's poor. It just means that there is a lot of room for improvement. And I've been in scenarios through my career where I've seen great leaders, great managers, people of influence within an organization who are outstanding communicators, brilliant storytellers, and they have transformed a business, through what they say and how they say it, or what they communicate and how they communicate. And that has a direct impact on the performance of the company, has a direct impact on the engagement of people, the feeling and the culture. I've seen that. Equally, sadly, I've also seen where leadership who have poor communication, really poor storytellers, can in turn destroy a business, can destroy a culture, and even destroy people. And that has a negative impact then obviously on the overall performance of the company. Yep. And obviously people. And so I've seen this gap. We saw the gap when we were talking about it as experts, and it's something that we believe passionately that needs to be closed. So when it comes down to the topic of authenticity and other things to share, there's probably 2 key things I'd call out for anyone watching and listening to this. The first, number one, is to know the story of your company, but then also know how everybody fits into that story. So what do I mean by that? I would challenge anybody listening, and I'd maybe even challenge you, Tony, when you go back to the office, go into your workplaces, if you have a relationship with your leadership team, which I hope, people do have to an extent, if you pick them off individually and ask them the question, what's the story of our business? I can pretty much guarantee you it'll be different. Now, that's not a bad thing, because everybody has their own perspective. And that comes on to my second point in a second, which is about being you. And that's okay. But ultimately, the core of your story should be the same. If the core of your story is different, if you go to all the different leaders, you then think about the story that they then tell their staff and their teams and the differences that then happen. And suddenly, you've got this spaghetti junction of different stories about this entity of a business that it's in. So my key message there is that I think it's really important that the senior leadership team need to understand their story, be aligned on the story of the business, and then they should be able to articulate to their team members how they fit into the story. And I think if you can do that well, you can do it with impact, good communication, good storytelling, then that will have a positive impact on engagement and performance in the workplace. The second area, or the second, let's say, tip that I would probably cover is an ingredient within the Sprout model, and it's within the ingredient of the layer people, the people layer, and it's called being you. And for me, this is all centered on an individual feeling comfortable and confident in sharing who they are as a person and the filter of themselves. So what I mean by that is that their authenticity in how they behave in and around the workplace and outside as well, the vulnerability that they can show and share, because I think while for senior leaders in the business, while there's this gap, there is also this big fear that if you say, I don't know, or you get something wrong, or someone asks you the question, like, I'm really not sure about that, there is this perception of weakness that they're demonstrating. And because they're the leader, oh no, I can't be weak. Of course I can't. I need to know everything, And I think that's a typical feeling amongst leadership. They need to really try and drop that as much as possible and allow themselves to be vulnerable and be honest and open, because by saying that, the answers will come from the teams. Really, that's, great teams will support the leader and they'll create great stuff together.
It's the identity, isn't it? So you need to understand the identity of the company. You need to get the buy-in of the company. So your workforce, so when you join a company, you go there because you think you can make a difference.
Yeah.
And you wake up every morning with that passion that I can do this, I can make a difference. And if your leaders can't articulate that, or
yes.
they can't build that story to take you on that journey, and that is on a journey, you don't see yourself where you fit, right? And I really like what you said a moment ago, which was essentially the fear of failure.
Yes.
Which is actually things are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
Your leaders don't know it. Actually, you don't be afraid to get something wrong. So don't tell someone off when they do something wrong. Say, hey, this is a learning and this is really key. And actually your storytelling incorporates that. The things that I wish, because you do it and say it in your book. Do it in your book. Say it in your book.
I did it as well. I did fail a lot. Yeah.
But you talk about
you have
it.
to.
And you get emotional, you get upset. I've shed tears over something, or I've actually said something and I've gone, do you know what, I shouldn't have said that, and I've gone to that person and apologised. I said, do you know what, I said it in the moment, or I was delivering a message and it didn't land how I wanted it. So I went, I was going to sit down and say, listen, this is where I'm coming from. And it's that actually treating people in a human way as well, which is really important. And
absolutely. And I think, a big part of that's around two-way communication. And you mentioned there about, getting upset about things and failing. Things will fail all the time. There'll be challenges all the time. But it's important to be able to communicate it effectively with your audience through a storytelling process, I believe, because then you'll get a better result at the end of it, and people will understand more clearly what then needs to happen to help each other to overcome it, or indeed to learn from it and try and avoid it again. But you learn through failure, right? Yeah. You don't grow without unless you fail. So I think it's a good thing.
And that comes back to context and clarity, and never assume.
Yes.
Now that's another. See, I remember these things.
You've read the book.
Yeah, I've read the book. I have read the book.
In fact, you've got a better memory about the book than me, and I wrote it.
But it's so important, because we assume things, and I'm going to link that back to failure.
Yeah.
You don't want to look like an idiot in front of someone. So someone says, "Oh, can you do that?" and you go, "Yeah, sure, no problem," because you're afraid to say, "Actually, could I get that bit more clarity? I'm not sure." Or you hear terminology, or you hear just acronyms, little letters are said out loud, and you think, I don't know what that is, and you're too afraid and you should never be afraid to ask a question. And actually, if you don't ask that question and you do assume, what happens, Jamie?
There's another story about when I was in my time at Samsung, and I was presenting to the UK and European president a big pitch for a lot of money for a product line to do a load of marketing advertising. And I finished this pitch. I represented the team. I thought I did an amazing job. Obviously, I was just asking questions, getting great answers. Like, yes, I've got this. This is brilliant. We've got the money. We can go the next week. And I finished and I just said, what do you think? And they turned around to me and said, what's your point? What's your point? And what I'd not done, I'd not closed off my story. I hadn't brought clarity and I hadn't brought a conclusion, a decision point. I left it totally open. And that was a great example of me assuming that a Korean culture would be the same as my culture in terms of how I communicate and how they respond. What they wanted was a final A, B, and C, proposed options and a recommendation. I'd left it open to more of a debate, a discussion to get people's views, probably again more of a westernized mindset on discussion and decision making, but they didn't want that. There's no right or wrong, it's just that's what they needed, and I missed it. So I made an assumption and I failed then because we didn't get the money. And we left it there. So I've always had to go up the hierarchy of the decision-making tree. That's fine. Like, totally comfortable with that. I've always worked in that environment. What I used to forget was as you go up the hierarchy to get decisions for more investment, typically those people have less knowledge of your scenario and your situation. Absolutely they have. But you go in thinking they have the same level of knowledge and understanding. So context in those scenarios becomes even more important as well, to provide the right level of understanding to aid a decision or to aid a communication. And you'll find that in that decision, they'll be more engaged as people within that decision than they would be, otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
And part of me is a little conscious that we're talking a lot from, or we've not a lot, some from the leader's point of view.
Yes.
And actually, we want to encourage everyone to tell a
Yes.
story. There was an example very recently, and my colleague will recall it because he thought I handed him something else. But there's an example where you want to encourage your business to put forward their ideas.
Yes.
But you want to draw on empathy. Really, why we do it. So obviously we have our Pluxee card, which we love.
Yes.
But actually, how do we get the ideas from our customers? Or if I have an idea, or you have an idea, or someone else in the company has an idea, how do we give it that impact, that story, that empathy that thinks, do you know what, we should do this, add this new feature, do this new requirement, because actually make a difference. And an example in which you can encourage your teams to do that is by telling a story via writing a letter to the CEO, for example, or writing a letter to the product manager about how, so the example in this scenario that I wrote out was, I'm a single mother.
Yeah.
I'm using the Pluxee card, and what a difference it's made to my life. I'm able to make cash savings, and actually part of that is I'm making those savings, and I can actually take my children during half term and spend those savings to take them to a theme park or something.
Yeah.
And what difference that it's made to them. And I said, but do you know, if you also did this, that would make my life even better. And then you've created this story, and anyone can do that, can't they, Jamie?
100%. And it's really, I didn't know you were going to say that. And as you were talking through that, I was thinking about, I'm not a single parent, but I was thinking about my son, Cameron, who's 5, taking him to Legoland, getting 20% off, and I'm thinking, oh, that'd be quite fun, actually.
Yeah.
I must take Cameron because it's summer holidays coming up. And these stories just take you there. Whereas if you just said, Jamie, I've got a new bit of eco-plastic or virtual card, and I can save 20% in a theme park. Okay. I get it. I get it objectively, but all of that emotion that you've created within me through your storytelling just then, which I didn't know you're going to do, that will impact me at a higher level than if it was positioned a different way. So I think, to your point, brilliant initiative to do that, and the beauty about storytelling and how anyone can use it is that, number one, to practice it is completely free. You don't need a subscription, you don't need a streaming service, you don't need equipment. All you need to be able to do is be in a moment where you can communicate. And as human beings, in terms of when we're awake, we're communicating 80% of the day. So that's a ton of time where you can just practice it anytime that you want. And and you will start to work on it. And of course, I would say, use a great structure. Obviously, clearly, I think the Sprout model is a decent structure, but any structure, it doesn't matter. I think as long as you choose one, you stick to it and you practice it, because they say it takes 21 days to change your behavior. I actually believe it takes 28, because I think you need another week, not because of the number of aligned to the book title, 28, but you need another week to actually really see the benefit and impact. So 28 days, you keep that consistency going, and you'll suddenly find that it's part of your subconscious. It's just how you do it. So you won't be thinking about it. You'll just be acting on your own reaction.
Can you share any tips or experiences on how to nurture two-way communications?
I see two-way communication, metaphorically speaking, as a dance. So what do I mean by that? So there's a story I talk about in the book, and essentially it was a big event that I was hosting in Windsor. Beautiful place, and we had all of the company there because we'd just gone through a major merger and acquisition, and we were trying to create this new culture of kind of who we are, which is a starting point. That creating a new culture takes it's constant, basically. There's no end point. But anyway, I invited along Matt Dawson, MBE, who's ex England Rugby World Cup winner. He's also in the book. But I got a good relationship with Matt, and he came along, and he was coming up to talk about motivation and teamwork and collaboration. So he was due to come up on stage to the sound of the Strictly Come Dancing music. And I was obviously going to welcome him on, walk off, and let Matt do his thing. But impromptu, I don't know why, but impromptu in the moment, I took a decision that when the Strictly Come Dancing music hit, he walked up the stage, he looked at me, and I decided to kind of do this weird movement that, for those that are watching, you'll be able to see what I'm doing now. For those that aren't watching, don't, because it looks terrible. But anyway, I was doing this dance, and he kind of looked at me because he had no idea what I was doing. It wasn't part of any script or an idea. So he kind of came up to me. He kind of grabbed me and kind of twirled me round in a polite way of dancing, but in a way of saying, "Jamie, please leave." And then he turned around, smiled at me, and I walked off stage. And then Matt did a funny remark about, well, you're not going to get past the audition phases, Jamie, or anything like this. And then he carried on with his speech. I call that, which is an ingredient in the nurture layer of the Sprout model, the dance. And what you had in that moment was a completely unscripted moment where myself as the storyteller, and then Matt and the rest of the room as the audience positively responded, because everyone thought it was quite funny, and it kind of, broke the ice unofficially with kind of Matt leading into his moment. But we danced in that moment. That wasn't scripted. It wasn't linear. And I call that dancing with your audience. Because when you dance with someone, you're leading, you're switching leadership positions, you're working together, you're responding to each other, you're listening, you're making eye contact, and you are moving in that moment. It's not linear at all. Similarly, and linking to that, it's also employer value propositions, which, companies and probably a lot of the listeners spend a ton of money on every year, or when they want to relaunch. I'm not saying that I've been involved in ones which are good or bad, but my personal view is that I see many organisations spending a load of money with their people teams, with their marketing teams, to create this beautiful looking employer value proposition that shares this vision of what the company is like. And what they need to realise at this point is that for prospective talent, they don't know the business at this stage, probably. But then they start to engage with them and then start the onboarding process, because you create a great employer value proposition, because you want to attract staff, you want to retain staff, you want to build a pool of great talent. It's why you do what you do and target the right people. Those companies that don't dance with their audience and create an employer value proposition, which once a prospective talent starts the onboarding process, they start to meet people, get interviewed by people, be offered a role, join the company, if the experiences don't align, then at the very end of it, they'll be disengaged. Because what they're joining is not what was on the brochure. The date that they're going on was not the picture of the person on the social media profile, right? Yeah. So businesses have to be very careful. You spend all this investment on creating this visualization of this place that then people can see themselves within. They create a story themselves of how it could look like when they join. And then they find that the tone and the culture of the people that are interviewing them are not aligned to what they've seen in all of the value proposition work. They get the job and they join, and they realise that what they're working in and what they're doing is not the same. Now, that's not necessarily saying there, Tony, that in that example, again, there's been no dancing, there's been no awareness of how the two should meet. But it could well be that this is the vision of where the company wants to be, and it needs people, talent, to join to help achieve that vision. You just need to make sure that that story, that communication is effectively being delivered to the people that are looking to join or who are currently in that story themselves.
To explain it and...
Yeah, absolutely. They need to sell that story. They need to explain that story. And that dance of that two-way communication within that is super important. It's super important because the flip side of it is that you'll get disengagement, you'll get absenteeism, you'll have poor retention, the cost to hire will be going up, and it's just not a great place to be. So the dance is really important, metaphorically speaking, and moving with your audience, being responsive to your audience.
What about when you have, as we have today, generation, generational. So do you do different dances, or do you maintain one dance and make sure that you cover with everyone, or what do you do there, Jamie?
It's a really good question. I think it's just like a complete set of dances. I think it's the principle of the dance is still the same, but how you dance, who you're dancing with will change significantly. And you mentioned, I think, and as experts in this, you might want to fact check this, but I'm pretty sure there's like 4 or 5 generations now in the workplace. I think it's the most number of categorized generations that now exist in the workplace. So you've still got baby boomers all the way through to, I think, is it Gen Z now or Gen Y, Gen Z? It's one of the last letters of the alphabet. I know that. But what you've got there it's not just about age. You just, people. I think one of the biggest challenges, so back to your question, to go on to it, about is it a different dance? I think when you dance with someone, it's always different. And the reason being is because no one individual on this planet is the same. Everybody is different. I think Oscar Wilde, said, be yourself, everyone else is taken, because you're the only version of you. And I think sometimes, because it's hard to classify everybody individually, clearly, sometimes you can start to segment your audience, whether it be external or internal, into these like 5 different categories. Right, you're a baby boomer, you're Gen Z, you're a millennial, which means that you act like this. So I'm now going to communicate and engage with you like that. That can help theme, but I think individualized awareness of people is really important. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can bucket human beings in that way. And I explore that in the people layer, the Sprout model. So when we talk about that two-way communication, the people layer is really important because it's not just about the diversity of us as people, which I talk about in the book with a lady called Dr. Rahini Anand, who's a global leader in that, a brilliant lady, very, very insightful on the topic. It's not just about that. It's also about the kind of the flesh and blood emotion part of a human being and their feelings. And everyone will respond to a communication differently to any other human being on the planet. And so being aware of that, I think, is really important. I recall one individual, and their performance was dropping that I used to manage, and I could see it was happening, but it was really unusual. It was really unusual because they were always performing well. They were really they really enjoyed what they did, but I could see it dropping off. I can understand why, and I sat down with them. And hoping that with a good, trustful relationship that we had, they would be very... And there were things happening at home that they kept with me that I would never share. But that was impacting them. And it was the first time we talked about it. Now, soon after, as things sort of got better, you could see their demeanour in work was changing. And then, they were getting back to enjoying what they did. There are many people that wouldn't recognise that as something to be self-aware of in the office, and they could turn around to that person, especially if they're in performance-driven roles, like a target-based role, when you've got quarter sales commercial roles, and you're not performing with your numbers, doesn't mean you're not performing as a person. And being aware of that is really important. And I think, again, coming back to that two-way communication, being aware of the human being on the other side of the communication with you is really important. Equally, as the storyteller, I'm also a human being, and I also have bad days. I also have stuff going on, and that impacts me emotionally. And, you might catch me in a great moment, but you might also catch me in a bad moment. Doesn't make me any worse of a leader. It just means that emotionally in that moment I wasn't quite ready. And that then ties into hormones, which is a big part of the people layer, which I won't get into because we won't have time. But hormones are another wonderful way of eliciting emotion in people, and you can get different responses depending on the hormones flowing around the body at the time. But that people layer is also really important, and that individualization, as much as you can, is key when it comes to impactful communication and storytelling.
Awareness and behaviours, and not only yourself but others, or more so others, but then being open and honest and having build, because we talked about trust as well.
Absolutely.
You have to have that trust in order to be able to say, listen, I'm having a bad day, I really apologise, I misstepped, or actually really understanding those that work with you and actually saying, how can I help, and
exactly.
and supporting each other where you can.
And you need to have that environment where you feel safe to do that. That whole psychological safety, trust, which isn't a switch. It doesn't get switched on and switched off. People come into the office and clock in. Oh, we're now psychologically safe. And we leave. Oh, you have to build that over time. And that comes with the right behaviours, communication, storytelling skills from leadership, but also for everybody, within the business as well.
Jamie, it's really insightful. And actually, I think I would encourage everyone to grab your book or your audio, because that's just been released, hasn't it?
Yes, it was on Audible, Amazon and Apple Books.
So Jamie, before we go, what would you say are your 3 top key points that someone should take away from today?
So thank you, Tony, in fact, for having me in today to share my ideas. So first and foremost, be yourself, one of the ingredients. So always remember to be authentic. You'll become relatable with that. And don't be scared to be vulnerable and show witness as well. It's really important. Second is to remember to be fluid and always be dancing with your audience. Everybody's an individual. Everybody's different. Respond to that. It's not all about linear communication, and enjoy it. And the third and last point I'll say is buy the book. So 28 Bags of Sprouts Storytelling with Impact on Amazon or Audible as an audiobook. But, for the reason that you'll have a structure, it's free to practice, and just consistently use it. And I promise you will see a more positive impact through doing it. And who knows, you may even change someone's life, because stories change lives.
So thank you for listening, and thank you, Jamie,
You're welcome.
for joining us today. And I hope that this podcast has been empowering to all listening.
Join us next time to discover how Pluxee UK is putting the X in success, enhancing employee engagement and making life at work more joyful.